Hi everyone. So on this week's episode of the Winning at Business podcast, which is going out the week of the 18th of May, I believe, we're going to talk about mental health. It's Mental Health Awareness Week. And I thought it'd be useful to have a conversation around the different challenges that mental health can bring us. It's something I've had to deal with myself on a number of occasions. I talk about it at depth in my book, Hitting the Wall. How I went to the doctors because I wasn't sleeping very well, seemed to be lying in bed with palpitations all the time. And my doctor looked at me and said, you know, you're suffering with depression. And I looked behind me because I thought he was talking to someone else. And I was in this real sort of place of denial, I suppose. And it's always been something that's a stigma, I guess, for many people. But now I think society is much more open to the conversation, and the fact that Mental Health Awareness Week exists is a positive thing. And I don't want this podcast to be anything that's, you know, full of doom and gloom, but just to have a chat around what's out there, maybe what some of the signs might be, the spectrum along which mental health sits in terms of individuals and the society as a whole. I'm normally, as you know, joined by Shirley. Shirley's going through her own challenges at the moment, not so much mental, but physical. She's had an operation, so is convalescing from that. So I'm sure she'd appreciate any messages if people want to reach out to her and say hello. She's probably fuming now listening to this, thinking that I'm embarrassing her. But yeah, so instead I've invited someone I know through Kingston University, in fact, who's on the Help to Grow program there, a real authority on mental health, who has a business helping other people with their mental health in the corporate space, I guess, but he'll be better able to explain what he does. So Matt Butler, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hi there, Ash. Thanks very much.
So do you want to just briefly tell people, because I'm sure I did an awful job of introducing you there, but just tell people what what you do, your specialism, if you like, what's the change you're kind of making in the world, in the workplace especially.
Yes, Ash, thanks very much. It was a lovely introduction. Thank you. So yeah, I'm Matt Butler. I'm from Plan A Health Consulting Limited. I'm a mental health professional. I'm a mental health nurse by my background. And what we do is we help businesses get better at managing for mental health by working with businesses to help them create bespoke solutions for their workplace and their working environment to improve the mental health in the workplace, so that we're taking more of a proactive well-being kind of approach rather than waiting for the possible negative side of mental health when people may burn out or go off sick. So the overall business benefits are increasing engagement of the workforce, reducing absenteeism, reducing presenteeism, where people turn up but they don't sort of bring their full selves possibly to work, and working to generally establish more of an awareness of the importance of mental health and how businesses can benefit from that, leaving sort of business owners feeling more confident that they're able to manage with mental health. So, particularly relevant coming out of lockdown with all of the emphasis which has been brought into the mental health space. It seems like the tide has maybe turned a little bit, and people are more willing to talk about these things. And we're here to help people realise those benefits.
I think it's interesting you say that, because I think you're right. People have had maybe too much time alone to be introspective and think about stuff, and that can take people down some quite dark and difficult places, I guess, when you spend too much time alone, especially if you don't like the person you see in the mirror. And I just wonder, when it comes to business, especially because, we've got business owners that listen to this, and, what you're talking about here may be as impactful to a 3-person business as a 3,000 or 30,000 person business. What do you think, in your experience, is the kind of hidden cost, I guess, that is perhaps less hidden now, that maybe, we're able to quantify, that stems from, people being ill? And the big challenge for me is that if someone breaks a bone, I mean, I've got a client at the moment who managed to put his arm in a rug machine, and I don't know how he did it. He's not really sure how he did it. We laugh about it, but he's injured. His arm's in a cast. He can't go out on the tools. And no one judges him. They might laugh at him a little bit, and rightly so, but he's not being judged. It's a physical injury that everybody can see. But and there is a cost to that, to the business and to the things that he's able to do personally as well. And that's a very open cost. But when we're dealing with injuries that we can't see, what are the costs that perhaps we're more open to sort of recognizing as being impactful on people and the businesses within them?
Yeah, I mean, there have been some studies into quantifiable costs of mental ill health in the workplace, which I can get onto. But the unseen costs, I think, are those areas of people's personal lives and personal experience in the workplace, which they may end up, taking stuff home with them very often, which affects how they see the world, how they're feeling about the world, how they're feeling about themselves, and can have sort of significant negative reverberations throughout their family or other bits of their social support network. So that if the greater the level of realization and understanding of mental health in the workplace, then the less impact these kinds of feelings of stigma may have on people who are suffering mental health problems. And one way to look at that is to see the whole of mental health as a continuum, basically. So you talk about physical health. Often there is a link between physical health and mental health. If you're feeling under the weather, you've got a bit of a cold or flu or something like that, very often you might feel a little bit down as well. You don't really feel like socializing. You don't feel like you're at the top of your game. So I think there is a correlation really between physical health and mental health very often. And we're very used to compartmentalizing off the mental health bit and not talking about it, but it's actually much more useful to really get stuff out there and for people to talk about how they're feeling, where they feel comfortable, able to do so, psychologically safe enough to do so. And to start, examining that in the same way that you might look at this, the guy stuck his arm in inadvertently in the machine, because it's again, it's part of that continuum. So you could start off with a physical health problem, as we have done with COVID, and then that has negative impacts on mental health as well. And of course, COVID itself, long COVID, has those symptoms as well of impacting people's mental health, along with all the general insecurity that we have. So I think for many years we've been in denial a little bit about the impact of mental health, that some businesses are maybe if they can't physically be proven, they may be slightly suspect about mental health conditions because it's something they can't see, but it's just as real, just as impactful, and actually, when you look at the stats, just as life-threatening as physical illness, because mental illness, it does shorten people's lives.
So let's talk about those stats then. So are there numbers that kind of provide evidence for, how many days people are off, or the cost to the economy? Or, I mean, I know these are just like numbers, and we can unpick stats to make them show what we want to a degree, but there must be some sort of collated evidence now that shows the impact.
Yeah, so according to the research which was undertaken by Deloitte, originally from research which was done in 2017, and then it was refreshed and republished in 2020, just before the pandemic, it shows that on average, the cost of mental health to businesses equates to around about £1,600 per employee per year, for each across the board for different kinds of businesses, and that cost is made up through as an average of absentee, days off sick, presenteeism, so potential increases in productivity that people could have, and any sort of the cost of any measures that are put in place once the horse has bolted, as it were, when remedial things need to be put in place to correct that. So that could add up. Do the math, as they say. And if it's a £1,600 per employee per annum, you've got £16,000 if you've got 10, £160,000 potentially if you've got 100 employees. And
so that's kind of like the data from one source, if you like, which is fine. And I'm sure there are other sources out there. But what anecdotal data are you coming across in terms of your experience when you're working with people who are suffering from various mental health situations, but also the businesses that you're speaking to? There's a reason you started this business, so that you're obviously seeing a correlation between the two and an impact. What do you see day to day that perhaps people listening to this might go, oh, I've got an employee who's showing those traits, and I haven't really connected the two things? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, Ash. Yeah, I think there's a lot of unrecognized build-up of burnout in the workplace, and burnout is pretty much indistinguishable from depression, really. When people hit the point of burnout, that means that they're emotionally burnt out. They can't really function any longer. So if employers are experiencing employees where possibly their work productivity has dropped off and their performance has dropped off, but they're still turning up at work every day, and perhaps they're a little bit more seeming a little bit more stressed or a bit more sensitive than maybe they have been, then these are definite signs of burnout. And this is something which you can tackle with the right kind of strategy for your workplace, by addressing policies and procedures, so that you're able to assess for burnout before it becomes too much of a problem, and create an environment in which burnout is less likely to happen, by monitoring people, checking in with people, having that greater awareness of mental health in the workplace. You're able to see off those things, because once someone is off sick with sort of chronic burnout or depression, which can turn into a depressive illness, then that can be that person out of operation for a considerable period of time, and could be really expensive if they're a key person. As people suffering burnout often are, because they tend to be the kind of personality that might take on more work than other people, more responsibility. Then that can be really damaging to a business. Absolutely, key people go missing. Another area is very topical, which is the under realization of problems like ADHD in the workplace. So ADHD is attention deficit disorder. what we're finding is that there's been a real under reporting of ADHD and under recognition, really, probably by mainstream psychiatric services, that adult ADHD exists. And this can be completely debilitating for people in the workplace if very, sometimes very talented people if they're put on the wrong kind of job, something that they find hard, that doesn't fit in with their profile, their sort of attention deficit profile, then they're being set up to fail very often. And so that aspect of the resource that you could have with someone with an attention deficit disorder is being missed, basically. So there's still a lot of, even in mainstream NHS mental health services, a lot of failure to recognise these some of these issues, and subsequent, human misery, but also economic waste, really, because of that. People not fitting into the right jobs.
You've said a word a number of times that I've picked up on, which is environment. So I guess two questions. Well, so many questions, but two questions to start with. One is, how do you, so for people who are listening who are business owners, who are perhaps worried about the welfare, the well-being of their teams, how do you create an environment that is psychologically safe, in order that people can feel comfortable maybe talking about this or bringing this to the attention of the people that might be able to support them with it, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the initial approach is, for us, is to work with business owners and the key people in the business in terms of their policy, and then looking at the guidance and the standards which actually exist out there. There is an international standard on psychological risk at work, which can sit alongside the HR policies. So I'd want to check through those policies, look at opportunities that exist already. So sometimes in a workplace there's a good social networking culture. People might meet up regularly to play sports or do other things outside of work, or people could just meet up socially outside of work. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's not such a good thing. Things can go wrong in those kinds of situations. So it's about sort of trying to get under the skin of that and trying to get a feel for that, working with a business, and then looking at different solutions that might start to put something else in place, something more positive in place. So an idea which we've tried in the past is the idea of positive gossip. So instead of traditionally office gossip around the water cooler or whatever tends to be, oh, did you hear about so and so, and it's usually pretty negative. Yeah. But you can sort of play games with this and say, okay, we're going to gossip, but we're going to only, the rule is that we're only going to say positive things about people, and nice. Get workforce engaged in positive gossip, exercises of positive gossip. You do some training around things like that, and do have some more stimulating sort of briefer exercises in which people can get the ball rolling, doing stuff like that. Quite a lot of what we do is around education, providing education opportunities for people to learn more about stress at work, mental illness, the signs of mental illness and burnout, and what people can do to put in place to prevent that. And there's a whole variety of different creative tools that you can use these days to do that. It's just a question of finding the right fit for the right business and the right environment.
Cool. It's just fascinating now, because there's just obviously so much more that can be done, whether you're a big or a small business, as I talked about at the beginning, to enable the conversation. And I guess that's the key thing, isn't it? Is enabling the conversation. So how do you address that when, let's say you're, I'm very aware that this audience is, a lot of them are the smaller businesses, lots of owner managers, small teams. What are the things that we should be looking for when perhaps the owner of the business is the person who is suffering from a mental health illness themselves, but they can't see it? Do you know what I mean? What are the things? I mean, you talked about burnout, and that's very relevant, I believe. I was speaking to my wife several months ago, and she went through a stage where her biggest challenge was to make sure that her team were taking all their holidays, because they just didn't see the point, because there was nowhere to go and they couldn't go anywhere, so they just didn't take holidays. But actually just having time out with the computer off and doing some different things is healthy enough. So she kind of had to step in and preempt their burnout by doing that. But if you're on your own and you're not part of that corporate structure, and it's just you and a couple of maybe remote team workers, how do you identify where you're at on any given day and what you can do to kind of head off potential burnout or any other illnesses?
Yeah, it's a really difficult area if you're a business owner or business leader in that role, because you're almost hardwired for that sort of pattern of burnout, by having started that business in the first place and being in that role. But you have to sort of gently prise off the fingers of people when they're sort of hanging on to these things, and people need to step back a little bit. Have the opportunity to just to speak informally with someone who's professionally qualified in the area, and sort of reevaluate where they're at, and look again at their priorities in terms of work-life balance. It may be that sometimes I've come across certain situations where managers are so they're so anxious about the business and so anxious about the things that are happening that they fall into the trap of micromanaging situations. And of course, the point of being a business leader or in business owner in that kind of role is that you're free to get other people to work, and so it's probably about reevaluating where that person is, and we can do that through a variety of means. Applying different psychological tests, psychometric tests, looking at how people might be responding from things like the Myers-Briggs or other sort of well-known workplace tests, which have got some level of objectivity in order to sort of reevaluate where that person's at, and make sure that they're thinking about how to be where they really want to be, rather than burning themselves out and doing themselves long-term damage, basically. And maybe sometimes they're damaging the business as well, inadvertently, through doing that.
Yeah, that's something I see a lot, is people holding on for dear life to everything in the business, even though they've got a team. And you're having to deal with the stress of feeling like nobody can do the job you've asked them to do better than you, and not actually creating time and space, because you're trying to do everything on top of them doing everything as well, which is kind of a route to not a very good place.
Yes. Well, I mean, it must have, in your own line of work, as a sportsman as well, you must be able to see that sort of link between, doing something you love, and then, that actually turning into a business, and doing something which becomes a must do and a must improve on, rather than doing it for the joy of playing a sport, for instance, where the outcome, you care about the outcome, but maybe less so than when your livelihood is dependent on it.
Yeah, and I think that was a key trigger for me, is the realization that the thing that I was great at, that I loved, I no longer liked. Yeah. And that realization for me was just like, whoa, okay, this is not a good place to be. And fortunately, I had a GP who recognized this and actually took the time to listen to me and propose a solution. And that solution thankfully worked for me, and is one that I'm still able to employ and level up every day. Not drugs, although I do recognise that plays a massive part in some people's ability to face normality in many ways. But for me, it was I don't know. I was lucky. Just the solution that was put in front of me worked, and I don't feel. I think the important thing is I don't feel like any less of a person because I had some, had some CBT, some therapy, and because I was able to talk to somebody and find a solution for the illness that I had. And that didn't diminish me. If anything, it made me stronger, because being able to deal with it and recover from it and strengthen those muscles, if you like, because I'll always come back to that, means that I'm more likely to recognize when I'm dropping into that space in the first place, but also I'm far better able to deal with it because I'm more self-aware. And I think that that's something that we dismiss too easily, that just because you're ill and people can't see it doesn't mean that you're broken. It just means you're ill, and that there are solutions, and that taking those solutions, whatever that form might be, is okay. It is no different from putting a cast on a broken wrist, from having some codeine because you've got a headache, having a bath because you've got sore muscles after training. They're all just solutions to a problem, aren't they?
Absolutely. And yes, I mean, you mentioned medication a little while ago. That might be on the harder edge of possibly more serious mental illness. But even there, lots of medications these days they've got a bit of a bad backstory sometimes. There's a bit of a bad reputation or fear sometimes around antidepressants. Most of the stuff that's available today is really good. It's quite very low side effects, and it's highly effective, shown to be highly effective. There are some problems there, and of course people should probably try other solutions first, including cognitive behavioral therapy, or just exercise, or sometimes just simple things like getting out of the house, especially post lockdown. So we have to experience daylight in order to produce vitamin D, and vitamin D, lack of vitamin D can be implicated in case of depression. So getting out of the house, getting half an hour's daylight in the morning, half an hour's daylight in the afternoon, walking the dog, or just going out for a walk is essential. Just looking after ourselves in terms of our nutrition. Getting some regular exercise, doing even gentle exercise like yoga, things like that can all help ease up the burden of stress, especially yoga. Yoga's great for as a stress buster, and even if you don't do hatha yoga or the pranayama breathing techniques or anything like that, there's something called yoga nidra which you can do, which while you're falling asleep. There's always something that you can do in order to put in place a better stress management and more adaptive ways of approaching the stresses of life. It's interesting listening to you as a mental health professional, so advocating things that
I have applied to myself and encourage other people to. I mean, I don't give mental health advice because that would be dangerous, but for me, it's just very obvious that doing regular exercise, eating well, getting fresh air 2-3 times a day, drinking plenty of water, laughing every day is a big one for me. Finding opportunities to laugh. I mean, nothing beats half an hour of watching Friends, because you're going to laugh at some point. And I think all of those things, in fact, you can actually do laughing yoga now. I've got
yes, yeah. There is a form of laughing yoga.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Pete Can, who runs laughing yoga sessions for businesses and stuff like that, and it's really, really very well received. Mm-hmm. All of these things on the face of it they almost seem inconsequential, but the impact. I think it's the sort of the compound impact of not having them. So I know in the winter, for example, it's harder to get sunshine. It's less comfortable going out for a walk morning and afternoon when it's -2 and raining and a bit miserable. Your exercise is done indoors and it becomes a bit of a chore. It's harder to eat better food, salads and leaner meats and stuff, because you want to just we're predisposed to carving up, if you like, and getting a bit heavy at that point. Fat storage, etc., etc. So I know that I struggle a bit in the winter, and so I have to find different ways to kind of address that, and I'm usually much happier in the summer. And you alluded to this at the beginning, that the link between physical and mental health. I know when I'm injured, for instance, and I can't train, it does get me quite down, because not just because I can't train and I enjoy training, but because the chemicals that are released when I'm training. And, it's that kind of circle. So I think that's something to be aware of as well, is that there are some incredibly simple solutions that if people just apply regularly as part of their routine, and I'm not talking about necessarily getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and joining that club and meditating and blah blah blah, but if people just apply some simple things on a regular basis, they can stave off much of the challenges that are faced. It's no different for stretching, like stretching before a run. You stretch before a run, you're less likely to get injured during that run. Mm-hmm. So do some mental stretching every day, and you're less likely to get injured. I'm not saying that's a cure-all at all. Some people have some challenges that go well beyond the ability of those things to manage, and do need professional help on a regular basis. And that, I guess, that's where people like you come in. But there is a lot that we can do that's preventative, that's very simple.
Definitely. And I mean, often it is a physical aspect. So things like breathing to manage anxiety, for instance. So if you're going to do some yoga exercises, you normally have to do some breathing exercises, and that's one of the quickest ways to manage anxiety, and it's quicker than any form of medication. And of course, it's not it doesn't run the risk of any side effects, basically. Things like walking. So when you're walking out in nature, your eyes are naturally moving from left to right, which mimics the action of a modern therapy which is used for trauma, which is EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. If you go for a decent walk, it's equivalent to having an EMDR session as well. So you're always sort of working away those traumas and stresses by doing these things.
Interesting. So just to finish off then, what would be I'm struggling to kind of articulate this question in the best way, but what would be like your top tip for managing mental health in the workplace, whether you are the workplace or you are a manager of several dozen people or the leader of several thousand people?
Well, I mean, a lot has been spoken about mindfulness in the past few years. It's massively grown in popularity. Mindfulness is sort of originates in kind of Buddhist meditation. It's about detaching yourself a little bit from what's actually going on and getting more perspective about what's actually happening in the workplace. So these are the things which managers and business owners need to do. You need to get a bit of perspective of the business and an overview of the business. So try a bit of mindfulness practice. You can look stuff up. It's all over the place these days. But one way might be through mindful breathing. So you just watch the breath. Have a good make sure that you're inhaling through your nose. You're getting a good lungful of air, 3 or 4 breaths, and then just count. So on each exhalation, count 1. Next exhalation, count 2. Count up to 10. By doing that, if at any point you lose sight of that, you start thinking about, what are we going to do about this, that, or the other? What are we going to do about this customer or this business problem? Then draw yourself back and start again, and just try to find that mindful space in which you're more detached, so therefore able to apply more objectively an analysis of your business and your work situation. So yeah, do a little bit of mindful practice, I think, every day, possibly, before you start off work, and before at the end of the day as well. And another good practice is a yoga sort of concentration practice to at the end of every day, try and run through the events of that day in chronological order, but not get too attached to anything that happens. So again, this is quite difficult, but if you're doing things like yoga, you can start to establish techniques for doing it. The point is getting that sort of detachment, so that you're able to come at problems and analyze them more objectively and respond to them, rather than be constantly in their grip. So yeah, that would be my advice. Some mindfulness practice.
Brilliant, and so simple to do, which is always a good thing in my book.
Simple. Yeah.
Simple is good.
We're great at ambushing ourselves, Ash, as I'm sure you realise. The mind is fantastic for this. We could establish something like that, and then we come along and trip ourselves up. So it's the regular practice which is key, I think, and always coming back to it, coming back to the breath, coming back to mindfulness. You can't force your mind to do these things, but you can persuade it, I think, guide it down the right path.
Well, the brain's very smart, but it's also easily influenced, is my view.
Yeah. And it just takes that slightest little thought or slightest distraction, and you're off down a path where
jumps on it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Amazing, brilliant. Matt, thank you so much for joining me today. Been really interesting.
My pleasure.
I hope people listening have found that useful. If anything has sort of not bothered, or maybe bothered, but has kind of triggered a desire to take action through the people listening, and if people want to reach out to you, what's the easiest way to do that?
So the website is plana.health. So www.plana.health, and you can find me on social media, particularly LinkedIn is my main sort of platform for social media. So yeah, look me up on LinkedIn, Matt Butler, Plan A Health Consulting Limited.
Brilliant, amazing, thank you very much. Matt, I'll see you soon, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Ash.